Don't eat that, sir.
Annie's voice cut through the music. She came running from the direction of the kitchen, her small shoes skidding across the polished hardwood floor.
Don't eat that!
One hand held the side of her
Please,
dress
sir, stop right now. Don't eat that.
so she would not trip. The other pointed straight at the plate in front of Ethan Whitmore. Don't eat it, she said, breathless but clear. That food has poison in it. You can't eat it. Ethan Whitmore sat at the head of the long table. A silver fork paused in his hand. On the plate before him was a serving of roasted sea bass under a pale lemon cream sauce, the special dish his fiancée had proudly chosen for their engagement dinner. For one long second, Ethan did not move. Across the room, Grace Carter, Annie's mother, froze near the service doorway. "Annie," Grace said, hurrying toward her daughter. Her voice was low, frightened, and full of apology before she even reached the table. "Baby, come here right now." But Annie did not move. "She put something in it," Annie said. Victoria Lane rose slowly from the chair beside Ethan. She wore an ivory dress, elegant and soft, with a diamond engagement ring flashing under the chandelier. Until that moment, she had looked like a woman stepping into the happiest night of her life. Now her smile tightened at the edges. "Excuse me," Victoria said. Annie pointed toward the kitchen. "You went back there. You had a little white packet. You poured it into his sauce." A murmur passed through the guests. It was meant to be a private engagement dinner. No reporters, no cameras, no strangers, just family, friends, trust, and celebration. Victoria placed one hand against her chest as though the accusation itself had struck her. "That is an ugly thing to say," she said, her voice still controlled but no longer sweet. "Annie, I don't know what you think you saw, but you do not run into a room full of guests and accuse me of poisoning my future husband." Grace reached Annie and put both hands on her shoulders. "Mr. Whitmore, Miss Lane, I am so sorry," Grace said. She must have misunderstood something. She was supposed to stay near the breakfast nook. "I didn't misunderstand," Annie said. Her voice shook, but she did not back down. "I saw it. I saw everything." Victoria gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "You saw everything," she repeated. "A little girl hiding near the kitchen now knows more than the adults preparing dinner." "I wasn't hiding to be bad," Annie said. "I was by the pantry. You looked around first. Then you opened your purse." A man near the middle of the table leaned toward his wife and muttered, "She probably wants attention." Another guest, a silver-haired foundation donor, shook his head. "Children do that at big events. Too much excitement. She may be jealous." Someone else whispered, "Her mother works here. Maybe she wanted to be part of the party." Grace heard it. Her shoulders stiffened, but she kept her eyes down. Annie heard it, too. Her small face hardened with the stubborn dignity of a child who knew she was being doubted, but had not yet learned to surrender. "I don't want attention," she said. "I'm telling the truth." Ethan set his fork down. Annie said carefully, "Look at me." She did. "Are you sure you didn't see one of the chefs adding seasoning? Flour, salt, maybe powdered sugar?" "No, sir. It came from Miss Victoria's purse." Victoria turned sharply toward Ethan. "Ethan, surely you are not entertaining this." "I'm asking a question," he said. "You are asking a child whether your fiancé poisoned you at our engagement dinner." Her voice rose slightly. Then she caught herself and looked around the table as if embarrassed to be forced into such a position. "Do you hear how insane that sounds?" Ethan looked down at the plate. Then he glanced around the table. Other guests had already begun eating. Some plates were half empty. Glasses had been raised. Napkins had been unfolded. Nobody looked sick. Nobody was coughing, sweating, or clutching their stomach. "Annie," he said, more gently now, "everyone else is eating. Nothing has happened to anyone. That plate is different." Annie said at once. "Mrs. Helen said it was yours. It has the little gold flower on the side." At the service doorway, Mrs. Helen Brooks, the longtime house manager, went very still. Her eyes moved to Ethan's plate. Annie was right. Ethan's dish had been prepared separately because he preferred a lighter sauce and no cracked pepper. Victoria saw Helen's expression and spoke quickly. "Yes, I checked his plate," Victoria said, "because I wanted tonight to be perfect. I checked the flour, the wine, the dessert, and yes, Ethan's dinner. That is what a woman does when she loves a man and wants their engagement night to be beautiful." She turned her gaze back to Annie. The softness disappeared, but this is rude, it is disrespectful, and frankly, it is cruel. "I am standing here as Ethan's future wife in front of people who love us, and you are accusing me of trying to kill him." Annie's fingers tightened around her cloth doll. "I'm not trying to be cruel," she said. "I'm trying to stop him." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Enough." Grace lowered her voice. "Annie, please come with me." Before Grace could suddenly move, before Ethan understood what she was doing, Annie grabbed the edge of his plate with both hands and pulled it away from him. Gasps rose around the table. "Annie," Grace cried, "give that back," Victoria snapped. Annie held the plate against her chest as carefully as she could, keeping it level so the sauce would not spill. "He can't eat this." Ethan pushed back his chair. "Annie," he said, now firm, "hand me the plate." "No, sir, Annie, it'll hurt you." Ethan stepped toward her and reached for the plate. Annie turned her small body away, but he caught the edge before it slipped. For one tense moment, their hands were on the same dish. Annie pulled back with fear. "Let go," he said. "Please don't eat it. Let go of the plate." She hesitated. Ethan took that moment to pull the dish firmly from her hands, not violently, but decisively. The plate returned to the table with a soft scrape against the white tablecloth. Annie stood frozen, her hands now empty. Victoria pressed a hand over her mouth as if she were the one being harmed. My God, she said. She tried to take your dinner out of your hands. Ethan, this is not normal. Margaret Whitmore, Ethan's mother, watched her son closely. She had not spoken yet. At 70, she had lived long enough to distrust both panic and performance. Her eyes moved from Annie's stiff little posture to Victoria's trembling hand, then to the plate. Ethan looked at the guests. Their faces were tense, expectant, embarrassed. He could feel the evening slipping away from him. He could feel Victoria beside him, wounded and furious. He could feel Annie's desperate stare. Most of all, he wanted to believe that the woman wearing his ring had not walked into his kitchen and tried to poison him. So he picked up his fork. Enough, Ethan said, though not unkindly. The food is fine, Ethan, his mother said quietly. He looked at her. Mom, it's all right. Victoria touched his arm. You don't have to prove anything, but the way she said it made it sound as though she very much needed him to. Ethan cut off a small piece of fish, gathered a little sauce, and raised the fork. Annie stared at him, silent now, her whole body tight with fear. Just a bite, Ethan said. Then we can stop frightening each other. He ate. A few seconds passed, then 10, then 20. Nothing happened. Ethan swallowed, set his fork down, and looked around the table with a measured smile. There, he said, the dish is fine. There is no problem with the food. A few guests exhaled. Someone gave a nervous laugh. The silver-haired donor shook his head as though the matter had been settled. Victoria closed her eyes dramatically and leaned one hand against the back of Ethan's chair. Oh, thank God, she whispered loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Ethan, I was so scared. I cannot believe this is happening tonight. She turned slightly, pressing her fingers to lips. Her breathing quickened. She looked pale now, but not in the way Ethan did a minute later. Hers was a public kind of panic arranged for the room to witness. I need air, Victoria said. I feel like I'm the one being attacked. Annie watched her carefully. Ethan's smile faded. The first cramp came low in his stomach. He shifted in his chair and pressed a fist lightly against his abdomen. At first, he thought it was nerves. Then heat rose up the back of his neck. The room seemed too bright. The scent of roses, butter, lemon, and wine pressed against him all at once. He swallowed. His gone dry Margaret saw it first. Ethan, she said. I'm fine, he answered automatically, but he was not. A wave of nausea rolled through him, sudden and unmistakable. He pushed his chair back, but the motion made the room tilt. His face lost color. One hand gripped the edge of the table. Victoria rushed toward him with a cry so loud several guests flinched. Ethan! Oh my God, Ethan! She grabbed his shoulder, then his arm, then looked wildly around the room. Somebody do something. Why is no one helping him? Samuel, help him. Dr. Samuel Reed was already moving. Step back, Victoria, he said. What's happening to him? Victoria demanded, her voice breaking into a high, frantic pitch. He was fine. He was perfectly fine. I don't understand. Ethan, look at me. Please look at me. Don't do this. Not tonight. Margaret stood her chair sliding back hard. Samuel, she said with the command of a mother who had no interest in anyone's performance, get to my son. Dr. Reed reached Ethan and checked his pulse, then his pupils. Ethan leaned forward, breathing through his nose, fighting the urge to vomit. What did he eat? Answered before anyone else could. That, she said, pointing at the plate, only that. Dr. Reed turned sharply to the table. Nobody touches that plate. Nobody removes a glass, a fork, a napkin, nothing. Victoria covered her face with both hands. This is a nightmare. This is supposed to be our engagement dinner. Margaret looked at her, then really looked at her, and something cold moved across her face. Victoria, she said, move away from my son. Victoria dropped her hands. Margaret, I'm scared too. Move. Victoria stepped back. Dr. Reed gave instructions quickly. Ethan needed to be moved, monitored, and taken to the hospital. The symptoms were not catastrophic yet, but they were wrong enough to make every trained instinct in the doctor's body sharp. An ambulance was called, though Ethan's private security also prepared a car, in case they could move faster. Guests stood in stunned clusters. Some stared at Annie now with a different expression. Grace pulled Annie close, but Annie did not hide. She stood quietly beside her mother, watching the adults finally move with the urgency she had tried to give them minutes earlier. Ethan was helped from the chair. As Dr. Reed and two security men guided him toward the hall, he looked once toward Annie. Their eyes met. He said nothing. He was too sick to speak, but the look on his face had changed. The plate remained on the table beneath the chandelier, the lemon sauce cooling around the place where one bite had been taken. By the time Ethan Whitmore reached the hospital, the engagement dinner had become something no amount of money could cover up. The ambulance rolled through the private emergency entrance, its red lights flashing across the glass doors. Dr. Samuel Reed stayed beside Ethan, one hand braced near the stretcher, giving short instructions to the medical team as they moved. He took one small bite. Dr. Reed said symptoms started within a minute. Abdominal pain, nausea, sweating, dizziness, no known food allergies. Ethan tried to lift his head. I can walk. His mother, Margaret Whitmore, stepped in beside him before anyone else could answer. You will do no such thing. Mom, Ethan muttered. Don't mom me while you look like a man who just lost a boxing match to his own dinner. Under any other circumstance, he might have smiled. But another wave of nausea turned his face gray, and he closed his eyes against the bright hospital lights. Behind them came the rest of the Whitmore family, moving in a tense, frightened cluster. Ethan's younger sister Caroline hurried in with her husband. His uncle Richard, a retired judge who rarely showed emotion, walked with his jaw clenched and his coat thrown over one arm. Two cousins followed, whispering to each other with the stiff fear of people who had spent their lives around wealth, but not real danger. And then came Grace and Annie. Grace held Annie's hand tightly as they entered the hospital lobby. Annie stood close to her mother's side, clutching her cloth doll, watching the doctors wheel Ethan away. Grace had not wanted to come. She had said so 3 times before leaving the mansion. Mrs. Brooks, this is family business. She had whispered to Helen near the front hallway, we shouldn't be there. But Margaret Whitmore had heard her. The older woman had turned, her face pale but her voice steady. Your daughter tried to save my son tonight. That makes you family enough to come. Grace had not known what to say after that. Now in the hospital waiting area, the separation between worlds was painfully clear. The Witters were directed toward a private family lounge with leather chairs, fresh coffee, bottled water, and a nurse assigned only to them. Grace paused at the doorway, unsure if she was allowed to enter. Margaret noticed. Mrs. Carter, she said softer than before, please come in. Grace hesitated. Ma'am, we can wait outside. No, Margaret said. You and Annie stay where I can see you. Annie climbed into a chair near the corner, her feet not touching the floor. Caroline Whitmore sat across from her, still holding her phone in one hand. She studied Annie for a moment, then leaned forward. You're Annie, right? Annie nodded. I'm Ethan's sister. Caroline's voice trembled despite her attempt to sound composed. You were the one who told him not to eat? Yes, ma'am. Caroline swallowed. What did you see? Grace stiffened. Miss Whitmore, she's already had a long night. I know, Caroline said quickly. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to push. Annie looked down at her doll. I saw Miss Victoria put white powder in his food. The room grew quiet. Uncle Richard stood near the window with his arms folded. Did anyone call the police? Margaret answered without looking away from the hallway. Charles Benton is preserving the scene. Samuel ordered the plate untouched. Security is copying the cameras. Richard's eyes narrowed. Good, because if this is what it looks like, this is no longer a family matter. Grace heard the words and felt Annie's hand tighten around hers. Inside the exam room, nurses worked quickly. Ethan was connected to a monitor, blood was drawn, medication was given to settle the nausea and clear his throat cramping. Dr. Reed watched every reading with the focused calm of a man who had treated Ethan for years and had never seen anything like this. After some time, Ethan's breathing steadied. Color slowly returned to his face. The worst of the nausea passed, leaving behind weakness, anger, and a humiliation that sat deeper than the sickness. Dr. Reed leaned over him. You're stable? Ethan opened his eyes. That sounded like the good version of a bad sentence. It is. Reed pulled off his gloves. You were lucky. Very lucky. How lucky? Reed paused. You took one bite. If you'd eaten the full serving, we might be having this conversation in intensive care. Or not at all. Ethan turned his head toward the ceiling. Annie's voice came back to him. Don't eat it. He saw her small hands on the plate. He saw himself taking it back. That memory struck harder than the pain in his stomach. A nurse stepped in. Your family is waiting. Your mother is threatening to reorganize the entire hospital. If she doesn't see soon, Reed sighed. That sounds like Margaret. A few minutes later, Ethan was moved to a private room. The lights were dimmer there. The windows looked out over the city where traffic moved in thin streams of red and white. Ethan lay propped against the pillows, an ivy line taped to his hand, his suit jacket gone, his shirt collar open. Margaret entered first. For a moment, she was not the iron-willed matriarch of the Whitmore family. She was simply a mother looking at her son in a hospital bed. You scared me, she said. I'm sorry. I am not interested in apologies yet. Mouth tightened, almost a smile, then faded. He sat beside him and touched his hand. Why did you eat it? Ethan? He looked away. Because I wanted to believe Annie was wrong. Margaret did not answer immediately. Then she said, wanting a child to be mistaken is not the same as proving she is. I know, do you? He closed his eyes. I took the plate from her. His mother's face softened. Yes, you did. The door opened again, and Carolyn stepped in with Uncle Richard. They both looked relieved, though Richard hid behind a hard expression. Still with us? Richard asked. Unfortunately for my enemies, Ethan said weakly. Caroline came to the other side of the bed. You look awful. Good to see you, too. I'm touched. The small exchange eased the room for half a breath. Then reality returned. Richard lowered his voice. Samuel says the police may need to be involved. Ethan looked at him. Not May. Will. Margaret watched him closely. You're sure? I became sure about 60 seconds after I told everyone the food was fine. No one laughed. A knock sounded at the door. Grace stood outside with Annie beside her. Grace looked as though she wanted to disappear into the wall. I'm sorry to interrupt, Mrs. Whitmore said. I did, Margaret said. Come in. Grace entered slowly. Annie stayed close to her mother, doll tucked under one arm. Her eyes went straight to Ethan. He looked back at her for a long moment. The room seemed to understand that something important was passing between them. Ethan spoke first. Annie. Yes, sir. I should have listened to you. Annie did not look proud. She did not look pleased to be right. She looked like a child who had been carrying something too heavy and was finally allowed to set part of it down. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and tell us where you are watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that matter. I tried to stop you, she said. I know you took the plate back.
Ethan said quietly.
Can't lay.
I did.
Caroline looked at you, blinking fast. Grace pressed her lips together.
Ethan continued. Annie thought about that. Are you going to be okay? Dr. Reed says, I will.
She nodded once, serious and small. Good. The door opened before anyone could say more. Victoria Lane entered with a titouche in one hand and tears shining on her face. Ethan, she breathed. Everyone turned. Victoria had changed nothing about her appearance except the expression. Her ivory dress was still perfect. Her hair still fell neatly over one shoulder. The engagement ring still flashed on her finger, but now she looked fragile, devastated, almost theatrical in her grief. She rushed toward the bed. Oh, thank God, she said, her voice breaking. I was losing my mind out there. No one would tell me anything. I thought I had lost you. Margaret stood. Victoria stopped just short of the bed as if noticing the room's coldness for the first time. Why is everyone looking at me like that? She asked, pressing the tissue to her mouth. Ethan, please say something. Ethan studied her. This was the woman who had stood beside him at Charity Gallus, the woman who had kissed his cheek beneath camera flashes, the woman who had helped plan tonight's dinner and smiled while Annie begged him not to eat. Now she looked like the victim of the evening. I'm alive, Ethan said. Victoria gave a wounded little laugh through her tears. That's all you have to say to me? What would you like me to say? That you know I would never hurt you, that you know this whole thing is some terrible misunderstanding. Grace felt Annie shift beside her. Victoria noticed the child and seemed to fold even further into sorrow, and she's here. Victoria whispered as though Annie's presence injured her. Ethan, I cannot believe this. That little girl accused me in front of everyone. She turned our engagement dinner into a nightmare. And now she's standing in your hospital room as if she belongs here. Its voice was careful. Victoria looked at her. Margaret, I am the one being accused of poisoning the man I love. Am I not allowed to be upset? You are allowed to be upset, Richard said from near the wall. You are not allowed to intimidate a witness. Victoria stared at him. A witness? She is a child. Victoria's tears paused only for a second. Then she covered her face again. This is cruel. I checked the kitchen because I wanted everything perfect. I touched the plate. Yes, maybe I did, but not like that. Not the way she says. Ethan, you know me. Ethan did not answer. Victoria moved closer to the bed, her voice softening into something intimate. Baby, look at me. We were supposed to announce our wedding date tonight. We were supposed to be happy. Please don't let fear and confusion destroy us. Ethan looked at his mother, then at Grace, then at Annie. Finally, Ethan turned back to Victoria. Dr. Reed ordered the plate preserved.
Victoria blinked. Of course, that makes sense. The food is being tested. I would expect nothing less.
The kitchen cameras are being pulled. That was when something changed. Not much. Not enough for everyone to see, but Ethan saw it. Margaret saw it too. A slight tightening around Victoria's mouth. A small delay before the next breath. Then she recovered. Good, Victoria said. Then the cameras will prove I did nothing wrong. Maybe they will. Ethan said. The room held its breath. Victoria's tears returned, but now they seemed to arrive with effort. I can't do this, she whispered. I came here because I love you and I am being treated like a criminal. No one called you that, Richard said. You didn't have to. She turned toward the door, then stopped and looked back at Ethan. Pitiful and beautiful under the hospital lights. When you're ready to remember who stood by you, call me. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Annie said very quietly, she looked scared when you said cameras. Ethan looked at her. Grace touched Annie's shoulder. Baby, no. Ethan said, let her speak. Annie met his eyes. She didn't look scared when you were sick. She looked scared when you said cameras. Margaret slowly sat back down. Dr. Reed returned just then, holding a chart. He looked around the room, sensing the shift. Did I miss something? Ethan's gaze stayed on the door Victoria had closed behind her. No, he said. I think we're just beginning. That night, as the hospital settled into its quieter hours and the machines beside Ethan's bed kept steady rhythm, the Whitmore family remained close. Grace and Annie were given a small room nearby to rest. Though Grace sat awake for a long time, one hand on her daughter's back, staring at the wall, Ethan did not sleep much either. Pain had brought him to the hospital. Annie's warning had followed him there. But Victoria's face when he mentioned the camera stayed with him most of all. By dawn, he knew three things with a clarity that made his stomach turn again. Someone had put something in his food. A child had seen it happen. And the woman he was supposed to marry was far more afraid of the truth than she had ever been of losing him. Morning came slowly to the private hospital suite, not with birdsong or sunlight, but with the soft beeping of monitors and the muffled footsteps of nurses changing shifts. Ethan Whitmore was awake before anyone entered the room. He had slept in pieces, never long enough to forget where he was. The IV line tugged lightly at the back of his hand whenever he moved. His stomach still felt tender, as if a fist had been pressed there all night. But the nausea had eased and his mind, finally clear of pain, had begun to do what it had done all his adult life. Line up facts, question motives, and look for the weak point in a lie. There were too many facts now to ignore. Annie had warned him he had eaten. His body had reacted almost immediately. Victoria had seemed more wounded by the accusation than frightened by his illness, and when he mentioned the kitchen cameras, her face had changed only for a second, but Ethan had built an empire by noticing seconds other men dismissed. A quiet knock came at the door. Dr. Samuel Reed stepped in, wearing the same tired suit pants from the night before and a fresh white coat over his shirt. He carried a tablet in one hand and a paper cup of coffee in the other. "You look better," Reed said. "I feel like I lost an argument with my own arrogance. That may be the most accurate diagnosis you've given yourself." Ethan shifted against the pillows. "Do we know what it was?" "Not yet. The full toxicology report will take time. The preliminary blood work shows irritation consistent with ingestion of a foreign substance, but I'm not going to guess on record. You're stable. Your heart rhythm is normal. No organ distress." That's the good news. And the bad? Reed lowered the tablet. "The speed of your symptoms bothers me. This wasn't bad fish. It wasn't nerves. Something triggered that reaction." Ethan looked toward the window. The city beyond the glass looked clean in the morning light, almost innocent. "If I'd eaten the whole plate," Reed did not soften it, "you'd have been in serious trouble." Ethan nodded once. He had already known, but hearing it from Samuel made the truth heavier. The door opened again before he could speak. Margaret Whitmore came in with 2 paper cups of coffee, one in each hand. Dressed in the same clothes from the night before, except for a gray cardigan someone had brought from home. She looked composed because she believed composure was a duty, not because she felt it. "I brought you coffee," she said to Reed, not to Ethan. "Ethan will drink whatever the nurses allow and be grateful." Ethan gave her a tired look. "I'm 40 years old. You are my son in a hospital bed. Age has been temporarily suspended." Reed accepted the coffee. "Thank you, Margaret." She took the chair beside Ethan and studied him. Charles Benton called. "The plate is locked in the estate refrigerator under security watch. The utensils, glass, and napkin are bagged. The kitchen camera footage has been copied twice." "Who has access?" Ethan asked. "Charles, Helen, and your head of security. No one else. Victoria." Margaret's mouth tightened. She called 6 times, and I did not answer. Ethan almost smiled again. "Remind me never to get on your bad side. You are on it now." Tempered reply. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Carter, and Annie are outside. They weren't sure if this was a good time. Ethan's expression changed. Margaret noticed. "Let them in." Grace entered first, holding Annie's hand. She had changed out of her service dress into jeans, a plain navy sweater, and a coat that looked too thin for the hospital's cold air. Annie wore a pink cardigan over her dress from the night before. Her cloth doll was tucked beneath her arm. She walked with the careful quiet of a child who had been told too often not to take up space. Grace stopped near the door. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. We didn't want to disturb you." "You're not disturbing me," Ethan said. His voice was rougher than he wanted. "Please come in." Annie looked at the machines beside the bed. "Are those helping you?" "They are mostly annoying me," Ethan said, "but Dr. Reed says that means I'm improving." Reed nodded solemnly. "Complaining is often a positive sign." Annie came a few steps closer. "Does your stomach still hurt?" "A little. Not like last night." She nodded, considering this with grave importance. "Good." Grace placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Annie wanted to check on you before we went home." Ethan looked from Grace to Annie. "I'm glad you came. There's something I need to say." Grace's posture tightened as though bracing for blame. Ethan saw it and hated that she had expected it. "Annie," he said, "last night you tried to more than once. You even took the plate away from me." Annie looked down. "You took it back?" "Yes," he said, "I did." No one moved. Ethan swallowed, feeling the shame of it settle in his throat. "That was my mistake, not yours. I should have stopped. I should have listened." Annie lifted her eyes. "You didn't believe me." "No," Ethan said, "I didn't, and I am sorry." The apology was simple, but it changed the air in the room. Grace blinked as if apologies from men like Ethan Whitmore were not things she had prepared herself to receive. Margaret watched her son with a quiet expression that held both pain and approval. Annie did not rush to forgive him. Children often understood apologies better than adults did. They knew when words were just words and when they cost something. After a moment, she said, "I wasn't trying to ruin your party." "I know." Miss Victoria said I was being cruel. Ethan's jaw tightened. "You were not cruel," she said. "I was making up stories. You were not." Annie held her doll a little closer. "I saw her." Ethan leaned forward slightly, ignoring the pull of the IV. "Can you tell me again, only what you remember? Nobody is angry. Nobody is going to interrupt you." Grace looked uneasy. "Mr. Whitmore, she's had a lot happen." "She has," Ethan said. "And if you want me to stop, I will." But what Annie saw mattered now. That last word landed softly. Now Grace looked down at her daughter. "Only if you want to, baby." Annie took a breath. "I was coloring by the little table and I went to see the flowers because they were pretty. I saw Miss Victoria come into the kitchen. She didn't see me because I was by the pantry." "Was anyone else in the kitchen?" Reed asked gently. "The cooks were by the stove. Mama was gone. Mrs. Helen was in the dining room." Ethan nodded. "What did Victoria round first?" Annie said, "Like when somebody checks if they're alone." Then she opened her purse. It was shiny silver. She took out a little white paper thing. Not a jar, not a spoon, a packet. Margaret's eye sharpened. "She opened it," Annie continued, "and she put the white stuff in the sauce on your plate. Then she stirred it." "With what?" Reed asked. "A spoon. Then she put the spoon under a towel." Ethan looked at Reed. Reed looked back, already making a note on his tablet. Annie's brow furrowed as she concentrated. Then the man came. Ethan's voice remained calm, though every nerve in him tightened. "Tell me about the man." "He was at the back door. He didn't come all the way in. He had a black jacket. Miss Victoria gave him an envelope. Did you hear what they said?" Annie hesitated. "Not all," the man said. "Tonight has to work." I remember, because he sounded mad. Grace's hand went to her mouth. Margaret stood slowly and walked toward the window, not because she wanted the view, but because her anger needed somewhere to go. Ethan kept his eyes on Annie. Did Victoria see you? No, I don't think so. But later at the table, she looked at me like maybe she knew I knew. That sentence sat in the room like smoke. Ethan, this needs to go to law enforcement. It will, Ethan said. But first, I want the food results and the camera footage as if summoned by the words. Ethan's phone buzzed on the table beside the bed. Margaret picked it up and glanced at the screen. Charles. Ethan reached for it, put him on speaker. Margaret tapped the screen. Charles Benton's voice filled the room, calm but strained. Ethan, I have Helen in security with me. We reviewed the kitchen footage. Ethan sat a little straighter, and Benton paused just long enough for everyone to feel it. The child's account matches the video. Grace closed her eyes. Annie did not smile. She only stood there small and still as if the truth being confirmed did not make it lighter. Benton continued. Victoria enters the kitchen at 7:42 p.m. She removes something from her purse, opens it, and appears to add it to the sauce on your plate. Annie is visible near the pantry door. At 7:44, an unidentified male appears at the rear service entrance. Victoria hands him what looks like an envelope. We don't have audio from that cold. Save the footage in 3 places, he said. One off-site. Nobody touches the original system. Already done, Benton said, the spoon. Helen found it under a folded towel near the prep station, bagged, the packet not recovered yet. Ethan looked toward Annie. She may have taken it with her. Benton understood. We'll check the trash, the sink, and exterior bins. Margaret spoke then, her voice controlled but sharp. Charles, Victoria is not to enter the house. She has already tried calling security. And I told them she is barred from the property until further notice. Good, Ethan said. Benton's voice lowered. Ethan, there is something else. I don't want to get ahead of the evidence, but Helen remembered Victoria spent time in your study last week. She said Victoria claimed she was looking for an old engagement photo of your parents. Ethan's eyes narrowed. There are no engagement photos of my parents in my study. I know. A silence followed. Ethan ended the call after giving more instructions. When the room went quiet again, the truth felt larger than before. It was no longer a frightening accusation made during dinner. It had a timestamp, a camera angle, a spoon in a bag, a man at the back door. Ethan looked at Annie. You told the truth, Annie answered softly. I said I did. The words were not rude. They were not proud. They were the plain statement of a child who had been made to defend reality. Ethan felt something in his chest twist. You shouldn't have had to prove it this way, he said. Grace looked at him. Really looked at him, perhaps for the first time, not as an employer, but as a man who was beginning to understand a very old unfairness. Children like Annie often do, she said quietly. No one corrected her. A few minutes later, Dr. Reed insisted Ethan needed rest. Margaret offered to have a car take Grace and Annie back to the estate, but Annie lingered near the bed. Ethan noticed something else. Annie nodded. When Miss Victoria came in here last night, she looked scared when you said cameras. I remember she wasn't scared when you were sick. Margaret turned from the window. Annie's voice stayed even. She was loud but not scared. For a moment, even Dr. Reed said nothing. Ethan looked at the child who had seen too much and still spoke gently. Then he said, I believe you. This time he said it before another test, before another video, before another adult confirmed her words. Annie's shoulders lowered just a little. Outside the hospital window, morning had fully arrived. Cars moved along the street below. Somewhere in the building, a baby cried, a nurse laughed, and an elevator bell chimed as if the world had no idea that Ethan Whitmore's life had split in two. Before last night, he had believed danger came from competitors, contracts, hostile takeovers, lawsuits, and men who smiled too broadly across boardroom tables. Now he knew danger could sit beside him in an ivory dress, wearing his ring, touching his arm, and waiting for him to take a bite. And the only person who had seen it clearly had been the little girl everyone else was ready to dismiss. Charles Benton arrived at the hospital a little after 10 that morning with a leather briefcase in one hand and the look of a man who had not slept because the truth had kept him company all night. Ethan was sitting up in bed when the attorney entered. His color had improved, but the weakness still showed in the careful way he moved. Margaret sat beside the window with a cup of untouched coffee cooling in her hand. Dr. Reed had left orders that Ethan was not to overexert himself, which everyone in the room knew Ethan would obey only until the next important question needed answering. Benton closed the door behind him. I brought printed stills from the kitchen footage, he said. The digital copies are secured. One with your head of security, one with me, one in off-site storage. Helen is watching the original system like it's one of her grandchildren. Margaret's mouth tightened. Helen has more sense than half the board. That may be understating it, Benton said. Ethan held out his hand. Show me. Benton hesitated. You should understand something before you see these. The footage is clear enough to confirm Annie's account. It is not flattering to Victoria. Ethan looked at him. Charles, she put something in my food. I'm past worrying about flattering. Benton opened the briefcase and removed a folder. He laid several photographs across the rolling hospital table. Ethan looked down, and for a moment the room seemed to shrink around him. The first image showed Victoria entering the kitchen through the side hall. She was alone, her silver purse in one hand. Her posture was relaxed, almost casual. Anyone seeing only that frame might think she had come to check on dinner, just as she claimed. Victoria stood beside the service desk counter, looking over her shoulder. On the counter were several plates, but one had been set apart. Ethan's plate, the one with the gold flower near the rim. Her purse was open. One hand was inside it. The third frame showed the packet, small, white, folded. Ethan stared at it until the edges blurred. Margaret rose from her chair and came closer. Dear God, Benton said nothing. He moved to the next photograph. In that one, Victoria's hand hovered above the sauce. The white powder was faint but visible as it fell. In the corner of the frame, half hidden by the pantry door. Annie stood small and still, her doll tucked up against throat tightened. He did not look at Victoria first. He looked at Annie. She was right there, he said quietly. Yes, Benton said, exactly where she said she was. The next photograph showed Victoria stirring the sauce with a spoon. The next showed her sliding that spoon beneath a folded towel. The final one showed a man standing at the rear service entrance. His face was turned slightly away from the camera, but his build, dark jacket, and posture matched Annie's description. Victoria was handing him an envelope. Margaret touched the edge of the photo, careful not to move it. Who is he? We're working on that, Benton said. Security is running the image through private databases. We may have a partial plate from a vehicle near the service drive, but the angle is poor. Ethan kept looking at the man in the photo. He wasn't a guest. No, Benton said he used the rear entrance. Someone either let him in or he already had access. Margaret looked up sharply. Victoria. That would be my assumption, Benton said, but assumptions won't hold in court. Ethan pushed the table away with more force than he meant to. The wheels squeaked against the floor. She put her hand on my shoulder and watched me eat. Margaret's face softened with pain. Ethan? No, he said, his voice low. She watched Annie try to stop me. She watched me take the plate back from that child, and she said nothing. The room went quiet. That was the cruelty he could not get around. Not the money, not the embarrassment, not even the threat to his life. It was the silence. Victoria had stood there and allowed a little girl to be humiliated for telling the truth. Benton carefully placed the photos back into the folder. The lab has the food sample. Dr. Reed requested expedited analysis because of the medical emergency. We should have a preliminary report soon. I want the spoon tested. To Ethan said it's already sealed. The towel? Yes, the trash? Helen had the kitchen waste secured before dawn. Security found nothing obvious yet, but they're sorting it under video. Ethan looked at him. Good. The door opened slightly and Grace appeared in the doorway with Annie beside her. She had not meant to interrupt. It was clear from her face. A nurse had told them Ethan was awake and Grace had brought Annie only to say goodbye before Margaret's driver took them back to the estate. I'm sorry, Grace said at once. We can come back. No, Ethan said. Please come in. Annie stepped into the room. Her eyes moved from Ethan to the folder in Benton's hands. Children were often told less than they understood, and Annie seemed to understand that the adults had been looking at what she had seen. Ethan turned one photograph face down before she came closer, not because he wanted to hide the truth from her, but because she had already carried enough of it. Annie, he said, Mr. Benton brought pictures from the kitchen camera. Annie looked at her mother, then back at Ethan. Did it show her? Ethan nodded. Yes. Did it show the packet? Yes. Annie stood very still. Then she said, so now they know. The words were simple, but they reached everyone in the room. Grace closed her eyes for a moment. You believe me now? Ethan felt the question like a hand pressing against a bruise. Yes, he said. I believe you. She studied his face, making sure the answer was not just something adults said to make a child quiet. Then she nodded once. Benton crouched slightly so he was closer to her height, though he kept a respectful distance. Annie, I'm Mr. Benton. I work for Mr. Whitmore. You did something very brave last night. Annie held her doll tighter. I wasn't trying to be brave. I know, Benton said. Most brave people aren't. Grace wiped her palms against her jeans. Mr. for Benton. Is Annie going to have to talk to police? Eventually, perhaps, but not alone and not today. We will make sure it is done properly. With your permission and with people trained to speak to children, no one is going to put her in a room and frighten her. Ethan looked at Grace. You have my word on that. Grace wanted to trust him. Ethan could see the struggle in her eyes. Trust was not easy for people who could not afford mistakes. Before she could answer, Ethan's phone buzzed on the table. Margaret picked it up, checked the screen, and frowned. Victoria? Ethan held out his hand, let it ring. It stopped, then immediately began again. Margaret's eyes hardened. Persistent. She always was, Ethan said. The phone rang a third time. This time a text followed. Margaret looked at it and read silently. Her expression turned cold. What does it say? Ethan asked. Margaret hesitated, then handed him the phone. The message read, We need to talk before this gets uglier. You owe me that much. Ethan stared at the words. Something inside him settled, not peacefully, but firmly. Charles, he said, draft a notice. Victoria Lane is not to enter my home, my offices, or any property controlled by Whitmore Group. Her access cards are revoked. Her guest permissions are canceled. Her name is removed from every event list and household file by noon. Benton nodded, already in progress and the engagement. Margaret watched her son carefully. Ethan looked at the ring marks still faintly visible on his own finger from where he had worn the matching band Victoria had insisted on for the announcement photos. It's over, he said. No one spoke for a moment. Annie looked confused. You mean you're not marrying her? Ethan turned to her. No, I'm not. Annie considered that with the seriousness she brought to everything now. Good. For the first time since the night before, Margaret gave a small, unexpected laugh. It was brief, but real. Ethan almost laughed too, but the ache in his stomach reminded him of why they were there. Benton placed another document on the table. There's more we need to discuss when you're ready. Helen found records showing Victoria accessed your study last week. She told Helen she was looking for a photograph of your parents. My mother's engagement album is in her house, Ethan said. Margaret lifted an eyebrow. And she knows I would bite anyone who touched it, Benton continued. Exactly. So either Victoria lied casually or she was looking for something else. Ethan's face hardened. What could she reach from the study? Personal correspondence, some legal files, possibly the secondary terminal if she had help. Benton did not say the rest, but Ethan heard it anyway. If she had help, the man at the back door was no longer just a shadow in a camera frame. He was a door into a larger plan. Dr. Reed returned before Ethan could ask more. I'm going to be unpopular and insist my patient rest. I need to make calls. Ethan said, you need to remain alive long enough to make useful calls. Margaret nodded for once. Samuel and I agree. Ethan looked as though he might argue, then glanced at Annie. She was watching him with the quiet expectation children bring to adults after adults have failed once already. He realized that if he wanted her to believe grown-ups could learn, he needed to start somewhere. Fine, he said. 30 minutes an hour, Reed said. For you bargain like a man who has never lost anything in his life. Ethan's expression changed. I lost the illusion that I was safe in my own home. Reed's face softened, then let the people who care about you help secure it. Grace gently touched Annie's shoulder. We should let Mr. Whitmore rest. Annie nodded and turned toward the door, then paused. Mr. Ethan, yes. When you talk to Miss Victoria, don't eat or drink anything. The room went still for half a beat. Then Ethan nodded solemnly. I promise. Annie accepted that and left with her mother after the door closed. Ethan leaned back against the pillows. His body was tired, but his mind was awake and moving quickly now. The plate had proved Annie's warning. The camera had proved Victoria's lie. The man at the rear door proved there was more than one hand in the dark. By the time the preliminary lab report arrived that afternoon, Ethan was no longer shocked by what it said. The sauce on his plate contained a foreign compound that did not belong in food. Not enough in the single bite to kill him, but enough to make him sick. Enough. Dr. Reed explained that a full serving could have caused severe distress. Ethan read the report twice. Margaret read it once and walked to the window. Benton removed his glasses, polished them slowly, and said, "This is attempted poisoning." Ethan looked at the folder of camera stills, then at the lab report, then at the phone where Victoria's message still waited unanswered. No, he said quietly, this is the beginning of finding out what she really wanted. And somewhere beyond the hospital walls, behind gates and polished doors, the house that had hosted an engagement dinner was now a crime scene, wearing flowers. The hospital room felt smaller that afternoon, not because the walls had moved, but because the truth inside it had grown too large to ignore. Ethan Whitmore sat up right now, the IV still in place, but his posture no longer that of a patient drifting between weakness and recovery. The lab report lay open on the table beside him. The words were clinical, precise, stripped of emotion, but their meaning carried weight enough to silence any doubt. Foreign compound detected, not consistent with standard food preparation. Ingested quantity minimal. Larger ingestion may result in severe physiological distress. Margaret stood by the window again, though this time she was not looking outside. She was thinking the way she had always done when something threatened her family. Not loudly, not emotionally, but with a kind of cold patience that had kept the Whitmore name intact through decades of business wars and personal loss. Charles Benton closed the folder after reviewing the report one last time. This confirms intent, he said. Not an accident, not contamination. Someone put something in that dish deliberately. Ethan did not respond immediately. He was staring at the indentation on his finger where his engagement ring had rested just the night before. It had already faded, but he could still feel it. Not someone, he said finally. Victoria Benton did not argue. The evidence points that way. Margaret turned from the window. Then the question is no longer what happened, it's why. Ethan's gaze lifted. And how far this goes. There was a quiet knock at the door before anyone could say more. One of Ethan's security staff stepped in. A man named Keller, broad-shouldered and efficient, the kind of man who spoke only when he had something worth saying, Mr. Whitmore. Keller said, Miss Lane is here. The room stilled. Margaret's expression hardened instantly. She was told not to come, she insisted. Keller replied, she's in the waiting area. Says she won't leave without speaking to Mr. Whitmore. Benton exhaled slowly. That was faster than I expected. Ethan leaned back slightly against the pillows. Of course it was. She knows we have something. Margaret crossed her arms. You're not seeing her. Ethan looked at his mother. I am. No, you are not, Mom. She stood there while you poisoned yourself. Margaret said, her voice sharp. Ethan, now you held her gaze. I owe myself answers. Benton stepped in carefully. If you do speak with her, it should be controlled, recorded if possible. No food, no drink, no physical contact, and someone present. Ethan nodded once. You and Keller stay in the room. Mom, you too. Margaret did not like it. That much was clear, but she also knew her son well enough to understand that once Ethan decided to face something, he would not turn away. Fine, she said, but I will not be quiet if she lies. I wouldn't expect you to be. Keller stepped out to escort Victoria in. For a brief moment, the room held only anticipation, the kind that comes before a storm breaks when everyone knows the air is about to change. Then the door opened. Victoria Lane entered slowly. She had changed her clothes. The ivory dress was gone, replaced by a soft gray coat and a pale blouse underneath. Her hair was still perfectly styled, but her makeup had been adjusted to emphasize the redness around her eyes. She looked like a woman who had not slept, who had been crying, who had been wronged, or who wanted very badly to be seen that way. Ethan, she said softly. No one invited her closer, but she stepped in anyway, stopping a few feet from the bed. Her eyes moved briefly across the room, taking in Margaret, Benton, and Keller, calculating. You brought an audience, she said, a faint edge beneath the sadness. Ethan's voice was calm. You didn't come here for privacy. Victoria pressed her lips together as if wounded. I came here because you almost died. I didn't, he said, because I only ate one bite. The words hung between them. Victoria took a step closer. Ethan, please. We both know this looks bad, but you're not thinking clearly. You were sick. You were scared, that child. Stop, Ethan said. It wasn't loud, but it was final. Victoria froze. Do not talk about Annie like that, he continued. Not in this room. Victoria's expression flickered. For a second, the softness slipped. Then it returned. I'm not attacking her, she said carefully. I'm saying she misunderstood what she saw children do that. Children don't invent packets out of thin air, Margaret said sharply. Victoria turned to her. Margaret, with all due respect, none. Margaret cut in. You lost that last night. Benton cleared his throat lightly, trying to keep the exchange from escalating too quickly. Miss Lane, perhaps you should explain your presence in the kitchen. Victoria looked back at Ethan, ignoring Benton. I told you already, I was checking your plate. I wanted everything perfect. Ethan didn't move. You opened your purse. Yes. You took out a packet. No. Ethan reached to the side table and picked up one of the printed stills Benton had left. He held up just enough for her to see. Victoria's breath caught only for a fraction instead of a second, but it was enough. That's you, Ethan said. That's your hand. That's my plate. Victoria stared at the image, then shook her head. That doesn't prove anything. It's a still frame. You can't see what's in my hand. There are more, Benton said calmly. A sequence very clear. Victoria's eyes flicked toward him, then back to Ethan. You're going to trust security footage over me? I'm going to trust what matches reality, Ethan replied. Her voice rose slightly. Reality, Ethan. I am the woman you asked to marry you, and you are the woman who put something in my food. Sans. Victoria's composure cracked not into panic, but into something colder. You don't actually believe that, she said. Ethan held her gaze. I didn't believe Annie either. That landed. Victoria took a step back, her eyes narrowed just slightly, the performance thinning. You're making a mistake, she said quietly. A very expensive mistake, Margaret straightened. Is that a threat? It's a fact, Victoria replied, not looking at her. Ethan, you've signed things. You've trusted me with things. You think this ends with a broken engagement? Ethan's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. Victoria smiled faintly, not warmly, not kindly. Exactly, she said. Benton stepped forward now, his tone no longer polite. Miss Lane, if you're implying access to Mr. Whitmore's financial or legal authority under false pretenses, I strongly advise you to be very careful with your next words. Victoria looked at him as if he were an inconvenience. I don't take advice from employees. I am not your employee, Benton said, and neither is the law.
Keller shifted slightly near the door, a subtle reminder of boundaries.
Ethan watched Victoria closely. The man at the back door, he said. Who is he?
Victoria didn't answer. You handed him an envelope. Ethan continued. He said, tonight has to work. What was supposed to work?
Still nothing. Ethan leaned forward slightly despite the discomfort. Was I supposed to get sick or something worse? Victoria's silence stretched. Then she sighed as if tired of the entire conversation. You're asking the wrong questions, she said. Then give me the right ones. She looked at him, and for the first time, there was no softness left at all. The right question, she said, damn it, you're willing to do to yourself to prove I'm your enemy. Margaret let out a sharp breath. Get out. Victoria didn't move. Ethan spoke instead. The engagement is over. That landed harder than anything else. Victoria's jaw tightened. You're serious? Yes. And you think you can just walk away? I know I can. She studied him, measuring, recalculating. Then she gave a small, humorless laugh. You always did believe you were in control. I am, Ethan said. Victoria shook her head slowly. Not this time. She turned toward the door, then paused, glancing back at him. When you figure out what you've really stepped into, she said, you'll wish you had listened to me instead of that child. Ethan didn't respond. Victoria looked at Annie's empty space in the room, as if the girl were still there, then back at Ethan. Good luck, she said softly, and then she left. The door closed behind her with a quiet click for several seconds. Then Margaret said very calmly, she knows something we don't. Benton nodded. And she's confident enough to say it out loud. Ethan leaned back against the pillows, his body still recovering, but his mind sharper than it had been in years. She's not afraid of being caught, he said. She's afraid of what we'll find if we keep looking. Keller stepped closer. Sir, what are your instructions? Ethan's gaze moved to the lab report, then to the photographs, then to the door Victoria had just walked through. Lock everything down, he said. Financial records, access logs, staff movements. I want a full audit of every document I've signed in the last 3 months. Benton nodded. I'll start immediately and find that man, Ethan added. I want a name. Keller gave a short nod. Yes, sir. Margaret watched her son carefully. Ethan, this may not be small. He met her eyes. I know, he said for the first time since the night before. There was no hesitation in his voice. The engagement had ended. The illusion had shattered. What remained was something far more dangerous than betrayal. It was a plan, and Ethan Whitmore had just stepped directly into it. The shift from shock to strategy happened quietly, almost without announcement. By late afternoon, Ethan Whitmore was no longer a patient recovering from a near poisoning. He was a man rebuilding control. The hospital room had turned into something closer to a command center. Benton had set up his laptop on the small table by the window. Keller moved in and out with updates from the estate. Margaret remained seated, but her stillness carried more authority than anyone else's movement. Ethan watched them all, then said, start from the beginning. Benton looked up. The last 3 months? Yes. Every document I signed, every transfer, every authorization Victoria had access to. Benton nodded and began typing. We've already pulled your digital signature logs. There are irregularities. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Define irregular documents signed late at night, some from your secondary device, a few from your home terminal. Timing overlaps with evenings you reported feeling unwell. Dr. Reed, who had returned to check on Ethan's condition, folded his arms. You had recurring symptoms, mild nausea, headaches, fatigue. You dismissed them as stress. Ethan exhaled slowly because they felt like stress. Reed met his gaze. They also matched low-dose exposure over time. The implications settled heavily into the room. Margaret spoke first. You're saying this wasn't one night? Reed didn't soften it. I'm saying it's possible last night wasn't the first time. Ethan leaned back slightly, absorbing it. She's been doing this longer. Benton turned the laptop toward him. These are the documents signed during that window. He scrolled slowly. Some are routine, others are not. Ethan scanned the list. Most were familiar board approvals, investment renewals, foundation distributions. Then one line caught his attention. Temporary oversight authorization, Whitmore Foundation. What is that? He asked. Benton clicked the file. It grants Victoria limited supervisory authority over certain foundation funds in the event of your temporary incapacity. Ethan's jaw tightened. I don't remember signing this. The signature matches, Benton said carefully. But the timing, he pointed. It was signed at 11:47 p.m. 3 weeks ago. Ethan frowned. That night, he stopped. You called me the next morning, Reed said, complaining of dizziness and stomach pain. Margaret turned slowly toward Ethan. You signed that while you were unwell. Yes, Ben said. That's not all. He opened another file. Conditional asset access clause. Ethan read it once, then again. If I become medically incapacitated, he said slowly, Victoria gains temporary control over designated financial channels. Margaret's voice dropped. How much control? Enough, Benton said, to move money. Not permanently, but enough to redirect assets, initiate transfers, and influence decisions. Salance. Ethan stared at the screen. She wasn't just trying to hurt me? No, Benton said. She was preparing for you to be unable to stop her. Reed added quietly. If your symptoms had been worse if you had eaten more, Ethan finished the thought. I might not have been in a position to question anything. Margaret stood and walked slowly across the room. She planned this, yes, Ethan said, and she expected it to look natural. Benton leaned forward. There's more. We traced several small transfers from the foundation over the past month. Nothing large enough to trigger alarms individually, but together, how much? Ethan asked. Just under $2 million? Margaret stopped mid-step. From a children's fund? Benton nodded. Ethan's expression hardened in a way none of them had seen before. Not anger alone, something colder, more deliberate. She used my foundation, he said. She used money meant for kids. Reed shook his head. That's a different kind of line. Ethan didn't respond. He was already thinking ahead. Where did layered accounts, Benton said. Shell companies. We're tracing them now. But there's a pattern. These accounts connect to a name that's come up before. Ethan looked up, the man at the door. Benton nodded. We ran facial recognition from the footage, partial match. Marcus Vale Keller, who had just re-entered the room, stopped. I know that name. Ethan turned to him. Tell me financial operator. Keller said not legitimate, works in gray zones, has been tied to structured fraud cases, asset diversion schemes, and high net worth targeting. Never convicted. Always disappears before charges stick. Margaret's voice sharpened, and my future daughter-in-law was handing him envelopes in my kitchen. Ethan let out a slow breath, so this wasn't random. No, Benton said, this is organized, Reed added, and patient. Ethan looked at the lab report and again, then at the photos, then at the files on Benton's screen. Every piece now connected into something larger. She needed me weak, he said, not dead immediately, just impaired, confused, signing things I wouldn't normally sign. And eventually Margaret asked, Ethan met her eyes. Eventually she controls everything. No one disagreed. The room felt colder now, even under the hospital lights. Keller stepped forward. Sir, security sweep of the house found something else. Ethan nodded. Go on. Your study, Keller said. We found a micro recorder under the desk. Benton froze. Yes, active transmitting. Margaret's face went still. For how long? We're still analyzing, Keller replied. But Estimate at least 2 weeks. Ethan's voice dropped. She was listening. Not just listening, Benton said, collecting leverage. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. Conversations, financial discussions, personal reflections, all of it potentially recorded. All right, he said, opening them again. We escalate. Benton nodded immediately. I agree. This goes beyond private legal handling. Margaret added, police. Reed corrected gently, federal. Ethan looked at each of them in turn. We do this carefully. No leaks, no public statements. Not yet. Why? Margaret asked. Because she thinks she still has room to move, Ethan said. And people like her are most dangerous when they feel cornered too early. Benton leaned back slightly. So we let her think she still has time. Yes, Ethan said. We watch, we document, we build the full case. Keller nodded. Marcus Vale. We find him, Ethan said, before he disappears. A quiet settled over the room. Not uncertainty, but alignment. Grace and Annie returned later that evening, not knowing the full extent of what had been uncovered, but sensing the shift in the adults around them. Grace stood near the door again, careful as always. Mr. Whitmore, she said, we just wanted to check on you before heading home. Ethan looked at them differently now, not just with gratitude, but with recognition. You're not going anywhere tonight, he said. Grace blinked. Sir, I've arranged for you both to stay in the guest wing at the estate. Ethan continued. Security will be there. You'll be safe. Grace hesitated. We don't want to cause trouble. You're not causing it, Ethan said. You helped stop it. Annie stepped closer. Is the bad lady gone? Ethan considered the question. Not yet, he said, but she will be. Annie nodded, accepting that answer. Then she said, you should be careful what you sign now. For a moment, the adults almost smiled. Ethan nodded. That's very good advice. Grace placed a hand on Annie's shoulder. Say thank you. Annie looked at Ethan. Thank you for listening this time. The words were simple, but they landed deeper than anything else that day. After they left, Ethan sat quietly for a long moment. Margaret watched him. You're thinking, I'm remembering. He said, what? The moment I took that plate back from her, Margaret didn't answer. Ethan's voice lowered. That was the moment everything could have ended differently, but it didn't, she said. No, Ethan replied, because she didn't give up. Margaret followed his gaze to the door Annie had just walked through. Children don't always understand the world, she said, but sometimes they see it clearer than the rest of us. Ethan nodded. Slowly outside the city moved as it always did, unaware, indifferent. But inside that hospital room, the pieces of a quiet, calculated betrayal had come together. And Ethan Whitmore was no longer reacting. He was preparing, because now he understood something that changed everything. Victoria hadn't just tried to poison him. She had built a system around his trust. And systems like that didn't collapse with one truth. They had to be dismantled piece by piece. By the time Ethan Whitmore was discharged from the hospital 2 days later, that world outside still knew he had suffered a minor medical incident. That was the official statement Benton had released, carefully worded, deliberately vague, and just credible enough to prevent unwanted attention. Inside the Whitmore estate, however, nothing felt minor anymore. The house had been transformed. Security presence had doubled. Cameras were being rechecked, replaced, repositioned. Every staff member had been quietly interviewed, schedules reviewed, access logs analyzed. The kitchen, once the heart of the home, felt like a sealed vault. Even the scent of food had changed, as if the memory of that night still lingered in the air. Ethan stood in his study, looking at the desk where Keller had found the recorder. It had been removed, bagged, and sent for analysis. But Ethan could still picture it there, small, hidden, listening. He placed his hand on the edge of the desk, remembering the conversations that had taken place here. Business strategies, financial decisions, personal reflections. He had never intended anyone else to hear. She was patient, he said quietly. Behind him, Benton nodded. That's what makes this dangerous. This wasn't impulsive. It was constructed. Ethan turned. What about the accounts? We traced another layer. Benton said, opening his tablet. The shell companies lead to a holding structure tied to Marcus Vale. Offshore, but not untouchable. We're building a path. How long? Long enough that he'll try to disappear if he senses pressure. Ethan walked slowly toward the window. The estate grounds stretched wide beneath him. Perfectly maintained, controlled, safe. Or at least give him that chance, Ethan said. We move before he knows we're close. Keller stepped in at that moment. Sir, update on Miss Lane. Ethan didn't turn. Go on. She left her apartment this morning, took 2 bags. No driver. No usual routine. Margaret, who'd been seated near the fireplace, looked up sharply. She's running? Not yet, Keller said, but she's changing patterns. Ethan nodded slowly. Good, Benton added, or preparing. Ethan turned back to them. Keep eyes on her, but don't approach. Not yet. Keller nodded. Understood. As Keller stepped out, Margaret rose from her chair and walked toward her son. You're letting her move, she said. I'm letting her reveal. Ethan replied. Margaret studied him. There's a difference, I know, he said. But right now she thinks she still has options. That's when people make mistakes. Margaret folded her arms, and if one of those mistakes hurts someone else, Ethan's expression darkened. It won't. The certainty in his voice was new, not the confidence of a businessman, but something sharper, more personal. A soft knock came from the door, but before anyone could continue, stepped in. Mrs. Helen Brooks stepped. Mr. Whitmore, she said. Grace and Annie are settled in the guest wing. I thought you should know. Thank you, Helen. Helen nodded, then hesitated. There's something else. Ethan waited. I've been in this house a long time, she said. Long enough to know when something doesn't feel right, Miss Lane. She asked too many questions about things that weren't hers. What kind of things? Benton asked. Helen clasped her hands, schedules, deliveries, security rotations. She always framed his concern as if she wanted to help, but now shook her head slightly. Now it looks different. Ethan exchanged a glance with Benton. Right? Dates? Down, you remember? Times, questions, anything. I already started, Helen said. It's in your study. Good, Ethan replied. After she left, the room fell quiet again. Margaret exhaled slowly. She was mapping the house. Yes, Ethan said, just like she mapped everything else. That evening, Ethan walked through the estate for the first time since returning, not as a homeowner admiring his property, but as a man searching for fractures. The dining room was exactly as it had been left, though cleaned now restored to its polished elegance. The long table stood beneath the chandelier. The white roses had been replaced. The silver gleamed, but Ethan didn't see beauty anymore. He saw the moment Annie had run across this floor. He saw himself taking the plate back. He saw Victoria watching. He stood at the head of the table for a long moment, then turned away. In the guest wing, Annie sat on the edge of a large bed, her doll in her lap. The room was bigger than anything she had ever slept in before, with soft lighting and thick carpets that made every step quiet. Grace stood near the window, still unsure how to exist in a space that felt borrowed. A gentle knock came at the door. Grace opened it to find Ethan standing there. Mr. Whitmore, she said, surprised. I hope I'm not interrupting. No, sir. Not at all. He stepped inside, looking around briefly before his eyes settled on Annie. How are you? He asked. I like this room. And it's quiet. That's good. She studied him for a moment. You look better. I feel better. She nodded as if confirming a fact she had already suspected. Ethan glanced at Grace. I wanted to check on you both and to say something I didn't say properly before. Grace straightened slightly. Sir, you've already know, Ethan said gently. Not enough. He looked at Annie. You didn't just warn me, he said. You insisted, even when no one believed you. Even when people told you to stop, Annie held her doll a little tighter. I didn't want you to get hurt. I know, Ethan said, and because of that, I'm still here. Grace's eyes softened, but she said nothing. Ethan continued. There are people now who are trying to understand what happened. And what you saw is important. Annie nodded. I remember. I know you do, he said. But you won't have to do this alone. Not now. Not ever. Grace looked at him carefully, Mr. Whitmore. Ethan paused. That depends on how much truth we uncover, he said, and how far this goes. Annie tilted her head slightly, the man at the door too. Ethan didn't hesitate. Yes. Then you should find him fast, she said, because people like that don't wait. Ethan almost smiled. That's exactly what we're doing. As he left the room, Ethan felt something settle into place. Not comfort, not relief, but clarity. Back in his study, Benton was waiting with new information. We have a financial trigger. Benton said one of the shell accounts tied to Vale just moved funds. Small amount, but recent. Within the last hour, Ethan stepped closer. From where? Benton tapped the screen. A transfer note in the city, not offshore. Local Keller, who had just entered behind Ethan, spoke immediately. We can track that. Ethan's eyes sharpened. Do it. Benton looked at him. If we move now, we might flush him out. Ethan nodded once. Then we move now. Margaret appeared in the doorway, having heard enough to understand. Be careful, she said. Ethan met her gaze. I will. Then he turned to Keller. Get the team ready. For the first time since the night of the engagement dinner, the balance had shifted. Victoria had made her move. Now Ethan was making his. And somewhere in the city, a man who thought he was invisible had just made the mistake of being seen. The city did not know it was being watched. Traffic moved in slow afternoon lines. People crossed streets with coffee cups in hand. Office buildings reflected the sun like glass mirrors, pretending nothing complicated ever happened inside them. It was an ordinary day for everyone except a handful of people who now understood that somewhere within that calm surface, a carefully built scheme was beginning to crack. Inside one of Whitmore Group's black SUVs, Ethan sat in the back seat, one hand resting lightly against his abdomen where the last traces of discomfort still lingered. He had insisted on coming. Benton had argued. Margaret had refused. Dr. Reed had threatened to sedate him if necessary. But in the end, Ethan had simply said, this started with me. It ends with me. And no one had found a way to argue that down. Keller sat in the front passenger seat, speaking quietly into his earpiece. Confirm position? Yes. Keep distance. No contact unless instructed. On the tablet between them, a small blinking dot marked the latest movement of the account Benton had flagged. It wasn't a person. Not yet, but it was a trail. And trails led somewhere. Transfer originated from a financial kiosk, Keller said. Public access terminal. That's unusual for someone at Vale's level. Not if he doesn't want to be traced, Ethan replied. Or if he knows someone is already looking. Benton added from the second vehicle behind them. Ethan leaned back slightly, thinking he wouldn't risk a visible move unless he had to. Keller glanced at him, meaning something changed, Ethan said. Either Victoria warned him or he's reacting to something we haven't seen yet. The SUV slowed as it approached a narrow commercial street lined with older buildings, laundromats, small grocery stores, a pawn shop with faded lettering. Not the kind of place where million-dollar transfers were supposed to pass unnoticed, which made it exactly the kind of place they often did. Target location ahead, Keller said. Camera picked him entering 10 minutes ago. Ethan's eyes fixed on the entrance of a small storefront with tinted windows. No sign, no branding, just a door that looked like it didn't want attention. Marcus Vale, Ethan said quietly. Most likely. Ethan exhaled once. We don't go in loud. Understood. The SUV came to a stop half a block away. Keller turned in his seat. Ethan didn't respond immediately. Ethan, Keller said more firmly, you're not fully recovered. If this turns, I'm not walking into anything blind, Ethan said. But I'm not sitting here either. Keller held his gaze for a second, then gave a short nod. You stay behind me. That's the idea. They stepped out into the afternoon air, which felt too normal for what they were about to do. Benton's car pulled in behind them. 2 additional security men moved into position, casual in appearance, but precise in movement. The door to the storefront opened with a soft chime. Inside, the lighting was dim. Rows of terminals lined one wall, each separated by thin partitions. A few people sat at them, heads down, faces lit by screens. No one looked up when Ethan entered. At the far end of the room, near a corner terminal, a man in a dark jacket sat slightly angled away from the others. Ethan recognized him immediately, not from a clear face, from posture, from stillness, from the same quiet alertness Annie had described without knowing the word for it. Keller moved first, approaching slowly, not aggressive, but deliberate. Marcus Vale, the man didn't turn right away, then he did. His face was sharper than the camera had shown. Early 40s, clean-shaven eyes that didn't waste time pretending surprise. Well, Vale said, leaning back slightly in his chair. That was faster than I expected. Ethan stepped forward, stopping just behind Keller. You're not hard to find when you start moving money in daylight. Vale's mouth curved faintly. And you're not supposed to be on your feet yet. Plans change. Vale glanced around the room, noting the positions, the exits, the number of people who weren't as casual as they looked. Then his eyes returned to Ethan. She didn't finish the job, he said. Ethan didn't react outwardly. You mean Victoria? Vale tilted his head. You say her name like you didn't trust her. That's new. Not new enough, Ethan said. Vale tapped the terminal lightly with one finger. You know, most men in your position would have been more careful about who they let that close. Ethan's voice stayed level. Most men in my position don't expect someone at their table to poison them. Vale gave a small shrug. That's comfort. It makes people predictable. Keller stepped slightly closer. You're done here. Vale didn't move. Am I? You're leaving? Keller said. Vale looked at Ethan instead. You really think this ends with me? Ethan's eyes didn't leave his. I think you're going to tell me where it goes next. Vale smiled, but there was no humor in it. That's not how this works. No, Ethan said, because from where I'm standing, your options are shrinking. Vale leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You're thinking too small. This was never about just moving money. Then what was it about? Vale studied him for a long moment, as if deciding how much to say. Lou, he said finally, access, influence. You're not just rich, Whitmore. You're connected, infrastructure, health systems, contracts. People don't just want your money. They want your reach. Ethan felt the weight of that settle in. And Victoria, he asked. Vale's expression shifted slightly. She played her part. Is that what you call it? It's what it was, Ethan. Stepped closer now, just enough to change the space between them. She tried to poison me. Vale didn't flinch. She tried to make you manageable. Keller's jaw tightened. Ethan's voice dropped. And if I had died, Vale held his gaze. Then the next phase would have started sooner. Silence filled the space between them. The hum of the terminals, the faint sound of typing from the other users, the distant noise of the street outside, all of it faded under the weight of that answer. Ethan spoke again, quieter now. You chose the wrong house. Vale smiled faintly. No, I chose the right one. I just miscalculated one detail. Ethan didn't need Vale said. The name landed like a stone. Keller stepped forward. We're done talking. Vale raised his hand slightly, not resisting as Keller and the other security men moved in. Careful, he said. You don't want to turn this into something public too quickly. Benton stepped in from the side. That decision isn't yours. Vale looked at him, then back at Ethan. You're going to want to move fast because if I'm sitting here, it means she's already moving somewhere else. Ethan's eyes sharpened. Where? Vale's smile returned thin and controlled. That's the part you haven't earned yet. Keller secured him, guiding him toward the exit. As they stepped back into the sunlight, Ethan stood still for a moment, watching Vale being placed into the vehicle. Benton came up beside him. We have him. That's a start. Ethan shook his head slightly. No, that's a warning. Ethan looked down the street, then back at the car where Vale sat. Calm despite everything, he said. If he's here, she's already moving. Benton frowned. You think Victoria's ahead of us? I think she planned for this, Ethan said. And we just triggered the next step. Keller closed the car door. We take him in. We get answers. Ethan nodded slowly. Then we'd better do it fast, he said, because somewhere beyond the edges of what they could see, Victoria Lane was no longer reacting. She was adapting, and people like her didn't run blindly. They moved with purpose, which meant the most dangerous part of this wasn't what had already happened. It was what was about to. Marcus Vale did not look like a man who had just been caught. That was the first thing Ethan noticed as they moved him into the secured interview room back at the estate. Not a police station, at least not yet. Benton had made that decision carefully. They needed answers before this became public, before lawyers, media, and outside pressure complicated everything. Vale sat in the chair with his hands loosely resting on the table, posture relaxed, eyes alert. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't protest. He didn't pretend. He waited. Ethan stood across from him, no longer in a hospital bed, no longer reacting. Keller remained near the door, silent and watchful. Benton stood to the side, tablet ready. Every word about to be recorded. You're calm, Ethan said. Vale gave a slight shrug. Panic, it's for people who don't understand the game. And you think you do? I know enough to recognize when the board changes. Ethan pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. Then let's skip the performance. You told me this wasn't just about money. It isn't. Then talk. Vale studied him for a moment as if measuring how much truth Ethan could handle at once. You're a gateway, Vale said, finally. Ethan didn't blink. Explain. Whitmore Group touches infrastructure, private healthcare, data security, logistics, Vale continued. You're in rooms where decisions are made before the public ever hears about them. Contracts, approvals, expansions. People don't need to own your company to benefit from it. They just need influence over you. And Victoria was that influence. Ethan leaned back slightly. By poisoning me, by weakening you, Vale corrected slowly, subtly, enough that your judgment slips, your guard lowers, your dependence increases. Then she steps in, handles things, signs things, moves things. Benton spoke quietly from the side, including funds from the foundation. Vale glanced at him. That was just proof of concept. Margaret, who had entered quietly and now stood near the back of the room, spoke for the first time. You stole from children to test your system. Vale didn't look at her. We tested access. Ethan's jaw tightened. And the end game? Vale's eyes returned to Ethan. Control without ownership. That's the cleanest way to operate. No public exposure, no board fights, just influence. And if I resisted, Vale didn't hesitate. Then the situation escalates. Silence. Ethan leaned forward slightly. You said something earlier. If you're here, she's already moving. Vale smiled faintly. You remember? Where is she going? Vale tapped his fingers lightly against the table. You're asking the wrong question again. Ethan's voice dropped. Then give me the right one. Vale's gaze sharpened. What does she have that you haven't found yet? That shifted the room. Benton looked up from his tablet. Keller's posture changed slightly. Ethan didn't speak for a few seconds. Then he said, documents. Vale didn't confirm it. He didn't need to. Margaret stepped forward. What documents? Ethan's mind was already moving. The study, he said. She was in the study last week. Helen confirmed it. Benton nodded slowly. We checked the desk, the safe, the primary files. Not just what was there, Ethan said. What used to be there? Vale leaned back, watching him now with something closer to interest. There it is, he said quietly. You're catching up. Ethan stood abruptly, turning toward Benton. Pull a full inventory of the study archives. Every file, physical and digital. Cross. Check against backups. Already started. Benton said, but that could take time. Keller stepped forward. Sir, if she took something, she'll use it. Ethan nodded, or leverage it. Margaret's voice was sharp. Against who? Ethan didn't answer immediately. Then he said, everyone connected to me. The weight of that settled heavily. Vale watched them silent now, as if his role in the conversation was already complete. Ethan turned back to him. You're going to tell me exactly what she took. Vale shook his head slightly. I don't know specifics. That wasn't my part. Then what was your part? Structure, access points, movement channels, making sure that when something needed to move, it moved and clean. And now Vale's expression didn't change. Now I'm sitting here. Ethan stepped closer, and she's not.
No, Vale said. She's not. The implication was clear. Ethan turned to Keller.
Lock down all outbound data from the estate. No external access, no file transfers. Keller nodded immediately. Audit, Benton. Ethan continued. Contact our internal tech team. Full audit. Anything accessed, copied, or removed in the last 30 days. Benton was already moving. I'll get them on secure line. Margaret looked at her son. Ethan, if she has something sensitive. She does, he said. We just don't know what yet. At that moment, Keller's earpiece buzzed. He turned slightly, listening. Then his expression changed. Sir, he said, we have a situation. Ethan's focus snapped to him. What kind of situation? Guest wing, Keller said. Annie. The room shifted instantly. Ethan asked, his voice sharper now. Security reports an unauthorized vehicle near the rear access road. It didn't enter the property, but it stopped long enough to observe. Then it left.
Margaret's face went pale.
You think? I don't think anything yet, Keller said. But the timing is wrong. Ethan didn't hesitate. Get eyes on that vehicle now, already in progress. Ethan turned back to Vale's voice colder than before. Did she know about the girl? Vale met his gaze. She knew the girl saw her. Did she plan for that? Vale didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough. Ethan felt something shift inside. Not fear, not exactly. Something sharper, protective, focused. Move with him, Ethan said to Keller. Secure location, no contact. Keller nodded and signaled the team. As Vale was escorted out, he glanced once more at Ethan. You're running out of time, he said quietly. Ethan didn't respond because for the first time since this began, danger had changed shape. It was no longer just about him. It was about Annie. Minutes later, Ethan was already moving through the estate faster than his body was fully ready for. Margaret followed close behind despite Benton's attempts to slow her down. Ethan, wait. No, he said. Not this time. They reached the guest wing. Security stood outside, alert but controlled. Grace opened the door before Ethan could knock. Her face showed it immediately. What's happening? She asked. Annie stood behind her, quiet, watching. Ethan softened his voice, though urgency remained. We're increasing security. Nothing has happened, but we're being careful. Grace's eyes searched his face. This is about last night, isn't it? Yes. Annie stepped forward slightly, the bad lady. Ethan met her eyes. She's still out there, he said, and we're making sure slowly, absorbing that. Then she said something that made every adult in the room pause. She knows I saw her. Grace tightened her grip on Annie's shoulder. Baby, no, Annie said quietly. She looked at me like she knew. Ethan felt that settle heavily. He crouched slightly so he was closer to her level. You're safe here, I promise you that. Annie looked at him, not with fear, but with a kind of serious trust that felt heavier than any contract he had ever signed. Then you should find her fast, she said. Ethan stood again. I will. He said he stepped back into the hallway. Keller approached with an update. Vehicles gone, plate obscured. We're pulling street cams. Ethan nodded once. Behind him, Grace closed the door to the guest room, holding her daughter close, not out of panic, but out of instinct. In the quiet that followed, Ethan understood something with absolute clarity. Victoria Lane had lost control of the plan, but she hadn't lost the will to finish it. And now, the one person who had exposed her was no longer just a witness. She was a risk, which meant the next move wouldn't be about money. It would be about silence. The estate no longer felt like a home. By nightfall, every entrance was guarded, every corridor monitored, every shadow questioned. What had once been a place of quiet control had turned into a perimeter under watch, not because Ethan Whitmore feared what had already happened, but because he understood what might come next, Sance. That was what men like Marcus Vale meant when they stopped talking. And that was what people like Victoria Lane chose when control slipped from their hands. Ethan stood in the main security room, a space few guests had ever seen. Walls lined with screens showed every angle of the estate gates, gardens, hallways, service paths, even the long private road leading up from the main highway. Keller stood beside him, issuing low commands to the team, adjusting camera feeds, marking timestamps. Street cameras picked up the vehicle 2 blocks out. Keller said, black sedan, partial plate, still obscured. We're enhancing driver? Ethan asked. Could be anyone. Ethan nodded slowly. It wasn't random. No, Keller agreed. They were watching. Ethan didn't need confirmation. He already knew. Behind them, Benton entered with a tablet in hand, his expression tighter than before. We have something from the study audit. Ethan turned. Tell me. Benton handed him the screen. A file is missing. Not obvious at first glance. But the index doesn't match the backup. Ethan scanned quickly. Which file? Private contract folder, Benton said. High-level agreements. Government-adjacent infrastructure expansions, hospital network integration, data routing agreements. Margaret, who had just entered behind Benton, stopped mid-step. Those are restricted. Yes, Benton said, invaluable. Ethan's eyes darkened. Leverage. Benton nodded. If she copied or removed those, she doesn't just have financial leverage. She has influence over contracts that affect entire systems. Margaret's voice dropped. Hospitals, data systems, public services. Ethan handed the tablet back slowly. She didn't just plan to control me. No, Benton said. She planned to control what moves through you. The room went still. Keller broke the silence. Then we escalate protection. Ethan nodded. Every system, every contract, every access point. Lock it down. And Annie, Margaret asked quietly. Ethan didn't hesitate. She stays protected. Keller added, we can move her and her mother to a secondary location. Grace's voice came from the doorway before anyone else could respond no. They all turned. Grace stood there, her posture steady, but her eyes alert. Annie stood just behind her, quiet as always, holding her doll. I'm sorry, Grace said, but we're not being moved around like we're something to hide. Ethan stepped toward her. This isn't about hiding. It's about safety. Grace met his gaze. Then we stay where you can see us. There was no defiance in her tone, only clarity. Margaret studied her for a moment, then nodded slightly. She's right. Ethan exhaled once. Then you stay here. But security stays close. Grace nodded. That's fine. Annie stepped forward a little. Is she coming here? The room quieted. Ethan crouched slightly so he could look at her directly. No, not without us knowing. Annie thought about that, but she might try. Ethan didn't lie. Yes. Annie nodded again as if placing that fact neatly into her understanding of the world. Then we should be ready. Keller almost smiled. Ethan stood. We are. Later that night, the estate grew quieter, but it was not the peaceful quiet of before. It was a waiting quiet, the kind that sits just beneath the surface. Listening, Ethan returned to his study. The desk was cleared now. No recorder, no hidden devices, just wood polished and empty. But it no longer felt like a place of thought. It felt like a place that had been watched. He opened the drawer where the missing files had once been stored. Empty, he closed it slowly. She planned this, he said to himself. She adapted it. Margaret's voice answered from the doorway. He turned. You're still awake. I raised you, she said. I don't sleep when things are unfinished. Ethan leaned back slightly against the desk. She took the contract, she set up the accounts, she brought in Vale, and she underestimated a child. Margaret added. Ethan nodded. That's the only reason we're not having a very different conversation. Margaret stepped into the room. Then don't waste that reason. Ethan looked at her. I won't. Before he could say more, Keller's voice came through the comm system. Sir, we have movement. Ethan straightened instantly. Where? Rear perimeter. Same sector as earlier. Ethan was already moving. Within seconds, he was back in the security room. The screen showed it clearly this time. The same black sedan parked just beyond the outer gate. Not moving, not hiding, waiting. Zoom, Ethan said. The image tightened. The driver's window rolled down slightly. A hand appeared, holding something. Keller frowned. What is that? Ethan's eyes. An envelope. The same size. The same shape. Just like the one Victoria had handed Vale. Don't open the gate, Ethan said. Not planning to, Keller replied. The car didn't move. After a few seconds, the driver stepped out, face partially covered. Same posture. Deliberate. He walked toward the gate, stopped just short, and placed the envelope on the ground. Then he stepped back, got into the car, and drove away. No rush, no panic, just precision. Silence filled the room again. Ethan stared at the screen. It's a message, Benton said quietly. Margaret's voice was colder, a threat. Ethan turned to Keller. Send a team. Full precaution. Don't touch it directly. Keller nodded and moved immediately. Minutes later, the envelope was brought inside, sealed within a protective bag. It sat now on the table in the security room. Scan first, he said. A technician moved in, running a portable scanner over the surface. No immediate triggers, no wiring, no chemical flags. Open it, Ethan said carefully with gloves. The envelope was slit. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded once. Keller handed it to Ethan. Ethan unfolded it slowly. There was only one line typed clean. You stopped one bite. You won't stop the next move. No signature, no explanation. But Ethan didn't need one. He looked up. She's not running, he said. Benton frowned. No. Ethan shook his head slowly. She's still playing. Margaret crossed her arms. Then we ended. Ethan's grip tightened slightly on the paper. No, he said. We finished behind him. Annie stood quietly in the doorway, unnoticed until she spoke. That's not a message, she said. They all turned. Ethan looked at her. What is it? Annie stepped a little closer, her eyes on the paper. It's a warning, she said. Silence followed. Ethan looked back at the message, then at the screens, then at the gate where the car had been, and in that moment, he understood something with absolute clarity. Victoria Lane wasn't trying to disappear. She was trying to control how this ended, and she had just made it clear. The next move wasn't going to be hidden. It was going to be direct. The message did not leave the room. Ethan stood with the paper still in his hand, reading the same line again. Not because he didn't understand it, but because he needed to understand how it had been written. Not the words themselves, but the intention behind them. You stopped one bite, you won't stop the next move. It wasn't emotional, it wasn't angry, it wasn't desperate, it was controlled. She's not panicking, Ethan said quietly. Benton nodded. No, this is calculated. Margaret's voice was sharper. Then Ethan shook his head. No, she thinks she still has leverage. Keller stepped closer to the table, then we assume she's going to use it. Annie remained near the doorway, silent again, but watching everything, not with fear, just with that same steady attention that had changed everything once already. Ethan folded the paper carefully and placed it back on the table. We need to know what she has. Benton tapped his tablet. The missing contract files are still our best lead. If she copied them, she could be positioning for blackmail, negotiation, or something worse, Margaret added. Or to force your hand before you can act? Ethan nodded. Exactly. Keller's earpiece buzzed again. He listened, then spoke. We've pulled additional street footage. The vehicle that dropped the envelope, same one from earlier. But this time we have a clearer angle on the driver's face. Ethan turned and running it now. Second stretched. Then one of the analysts spoke from across the match. Ethan stepped closer. Who? The analyst turned the screen. A name appeared. Daniel Cross. Benton frowned. That's not Vale. No, Keller said, but he's connected. Financial courier, mid-level operator, works under people like Vale. Ethan's mind moved quickly. So Vale wasn't the only one. Never, said Margaret, crossed her arms. And now this one is delivering messages. Ethan looked at the screen, studying the face, which means he's still in contact with her. Benton nodded, and close enough to move quickly. Ethan turned sharply. Tracking we are, Keller said. Last known direction heading east out of the district. Don't lose him, Ethan said. Keller didn't respond. He didn't need to. The room shifted into motion again. Quiet but urgent. Ethan, she wants us to react, he said. Margaret looked at him. And you don't intend to. I intend to react the right way. Benton raised an eyebrow, meaning. Ethan looked at the screens. We've been following her moves. It's time she follows ours. That caught their attention. Margaret tilted her head slightly. Explain. Ethan turned to Benton. What's the status of the foundation accounts? Frozen. Benton said. We locked all outgoing transfers. Good. Now unlock one. Benton frowned. Which one? The smallest? Ethan said. One she's already touched. Make it look like we're restoring normal operations. Margaret's eyes sharpened. You're baiting her. Yes, Benton considered it. If she's watching, she'll see activity and assume we're stabilizing, not escalating. Exactly, Ethan said. She'll think she still has time, Keller added. And if Cross is still moving for her, he'll move again. Ethan nodded, and this time we're ready. There was a pause. Then Margaret said quietly, You're thinking like her now. Ethan didn't smile. I'm thinking ahead of her across the room. Annie shifted slightly. Ethan noticed. What is it? He asked. Annie looked at the screens, then at the paper on the table. She's not just watching you. Ethan stepped closer. What do you mean? Annie hesitated for a second, then said, If she knows what you're doing, she might try to make you stop. Margaret's expression tightened. How? Annie looked at her, then back at Ethan. By making you scared, Silos. Not the kind that comes from recognition. Ethan, kind that comes from recognition. She already tried that. Annie shook her head slightly. No. That was before. Ethan studied her. Before what? Before you knew everything, Annie said. The words landed harder than anyone expected. Benton spoke quietly. She's right. Margaret turned to him. You agree with the child overtrained analyst. Now, Benton said before Victoria had control. Now she's losing it. That changes her strategy. Ethan nodded slowly. She escalates. Keller added, which means we don't just track, we anticipate. Ethan looked at the screens again. What would you do? He asked. The question surprised everyone. Annie blinked. May? Yes, she thought about it. I'd make you look the wrong way, she said. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. So, you don't see where I'm really going? Yes. Benton straightened. Margaret turned toward Ethan. The envelope. Ethan nodded. And the car. Keller's voice sharpened, then cross might not be the real move. Ethan turned. He's part of it, but not the center. Benton tapped his tablet quickly. If she wanted us focused here, then where isn't she? The answer came almost at the same time. The study, Margaret said. The competent added. The data, Keller finished. Ethan moved immediately. Check remote access logs again, not just the house, every connected system. Keller relayed the order. Seconds later, the analyst's voice cut through the room. We have activity. Ethan stepped forward. Where? External server, the analyst said. Attempted access to archive contract database just now. Benton's voice dropped. She's pulling something. Can we stop it? Margaret asked. The analyst shook his head. Encrypted channel, but we're tracing the endpoint. Ethan's eyes locked onto the screen. Where is it? He asked. The analyst hesitated for half a second, then said, Downtown Financial District. Ethan turned to Keller. Cross was heading east. Yes, Ethan's voice hardened. He's not the distraction. Benton looked at him. Then what is? Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked at the message again. You won't stop the next move? Then he looked at Annie. She wanted us to think the next move was coming here, he said. Margaret's voice dropped, but it's already happening somewhere else. Ethan nodded. She's not coming to us, he said. She's taking something and leaving. Keller stepped forward. We can move now. Ethan was already heading for the door. Yes, he said. We move now. Behind him, Margaret followed without hesitation. Benton grabbed his tablet. Keller began issuing rapid commands, and Annie stood quietly in the doorway again, watching the adults finally move in the right direction because the danger hadn't passed. It had just shifted, and this time they were one step behind it. The financial district never really slept, but that night it felt like it was holding its breath. Glass towers reflected the city lights in sharp angles, and the streets below hummed with late traffic and quiet urgency. Inside one of those towers, several floors above ground level, something was already in motion. And this time, Ethan Whitmore was not going to arrive too late. The convoy moved fast but controlled, 2 SUVs in front, one behind, no sirens, no noise, just precision. Inside the lead vehicle, Ethan sat forward, no longer leaning back like a recovering patient. The weakness was still there, but it had been replaced by something stronger, focus sharpened by betrayal. Benton's voice came through the secure line. We've isolated the access point to a private server room on the 23rd floor. It's leased under a shell company, one of Vail Structures. Ethan nodded, even though Benton couldn't see him. Security minimal on record, Benton replied. But that doesn't mean unprotected, Keller added from the front seat. We assume resistance. Good, Ethan said. So do we. The vehicles pulled into an underground garage beneath the building. The engine cut and the quiet that followed felt heavier than noise. Everyone clear? Keller asked. Short confirmations came through. Ethan stepped out. The air in the garage was cooler, sharper. It smelled faintly of concrete and oil. Ordinary grounding. He adjusted his jacket slightly, ignoring the dull reminder in his abdomen that he was not fully recovered. Stay close, Keller said. Ethan didn't argue. They moved quickly toward the service elevator. Keller swiped a cloned access card Benton's team had prepared. The doors opened with a soft mechanical sound. Inside, no one spoke. The numbers climbed. Sure, Shishio 23. The doors opened to a dim hallway. No receptionist, no signage, just a narrow corridor leading to a secured door at the far end. Keller raised a hand, signaling stillness. One of the team moved forward, scanning the lock, electronic, encrypted. How long? Keller asked. 30 seconds. Ethan stood just behind them, eyes fixed on the door. She's here, he said quietly. Benton's voice came through again. Activity spiked just now. Data transfer accelerating. Then we don't have 30 seconds, Ethan replied. Keller looked at the technician. Faster, the man adjusted his device, bypassing protocols with controlled urgency. 20 seconds, 15. A soft click, the door unlocked. Keller pushed it open. Inside, the room was larger than expected. Rows of servers lined the walls, lights blinking in steady rhythm. The hum of cooling systems filled the air, and at the center, Victoria Lane stood at a terminal. She didn't turn immediately. She didn't run. She simply kept typing for one more second. Then she stopped and slowly turned around. Her expression was calm, too calm. I was wondering how long it would take you, she said. Ethan stepped forward, stopping just inside the room. Not long enough. Victoria's eyes moved briefly across the team, then settled on him. You look better. I am. That's unfortunate, she said softly. Keller stepped to the side, positioning the team. Step away from the terminal. Victoria didn't move. You're already too late, she said. Benton's voice came sharply through the comms. Transfer at 80%. Ethan's gaze flicked to the screen behind her. Lines of data moved rapidly. What did you take? He asked. Victoria smiled faintly. Not take. Secure. For who? For whoever understands its value. Ethan's voice hardened. You poisoned me for this. Victoria tilted her head slightly. No, I prepared you. That's not how this ends. Her smile didn't change. You don't decide that anymore. Keller stepped forward. Step away now. Vic toward the console beside her. Toward the console beside her. Her hand hovered over a key. Don't, Ethan said. She looked at him, and for the first time, there was something real in her expression. Not fear, not anger, conviction. You should have listened to me, she said. Then she pressed the key. The screens flickered. The data transfer completed. Ben's voice came through tight. It's done. Full extraction. Well, silence filled the room for half a second. Then Keller moved. Victoria didn't resist as she was pulled back from the terminal. No struggle, no panic, just the screen scanning the final output. What did you send? He asked. Victoria didn't answer. Ethan turned back to her. What did you just give away? She met his eyes. Not give, she said. Position? Margaret's voice came through the comm line from the estate, sharp and controlled. Ethan, what's happening? He didn't look away from Victoria. She completed the transfer, a pausa. Then Margaret said quietly, then whatever she took, it's out now. Ethan nodded slightly. Victoria watched him. You still don't see it, she said. Then explain it, he replied. She leaned back slightly against Keller's hold, her voice lowering just enough to feel personal. You think this was about controlling you, she said. It wasn't. Ethan didn't react. It was about access, she continued. And now that access is shared, Benton cut in urgently. We're tracking the endpoint, but it's splitting multiple destinations. Ethan's jaw tightened. How many? 3? No, 5. It's fragmenting. Victoria smiled again. You're not chasing one problem anymore, she said. You're chasing 5. Keller secured her hands behind her back. This is over, he said. Victoria shook her head slightly. No, she said. This is exactly where it begins. Ethan stepped closer, close enough now that there was no distance left for illusion. You lost, he said quietly. Victoria looked at him. Really? Look this time. No, she replied. I just changed the board. Silence settled again, heavier than before, because this time she wasn't bluffing. Benton's voice came through, tense. Ethan, whatever she sent, it's already moving through external systems. This is bigger than internal control now. Ethan stood still for a moment, then nodded once. Then we stop it at every endpoint, he said. Keller looked at him. That's not a small task. Ethan's eyes didn't leave the screen. Neither is what she started behind him, Victoria said softly. You're too late to contain it. Ethan turned back to her. Maybe, he said. Then his voice dropped, but not too late to finish you. For the first time since they entered the room, Victoria didn't smile because she understood something in that moment. The plan had succeeded, the data was out, the system was broken open, but Ethan Whitmore wasn't reacting anymore. He was hunting. And whatever came next, he was no longer one step behind. He was coming straight through the center. The servers kept humming, but the illusion of control was gone. Ethan Whitmore stood in the center of the server room, watching the final traces of the data transfer disappear across the monitors. What had once been contained inside his systems, contracts, infrastructure maps, sensitive agreements was now fragmented and moving outward like sparks in dry air. Victoria stood restrained a few feet away, no longer smiling, but not defeated either. Her calm had changed. It wasn't confidence anymore. It was acceptance. Benton's voice came through the comms, sharper than before. We've identified partial endpoints. 3 domestic, 2 offshore data packets are splitting and rerouting continuously. Ethan didn't look away from the screens. Can we isolate any of them? Trying, Benton said. But she designed this to scatter. It's not one target, it's a distribution. Keller stepped closer. We can shut down the local server. Ethan shook his head immediately. Too late for that. We cut here. We lose trace. Victoria spoke softly from behind them. Now you're thinking correctly. Ethan turned to her slowly. You plan this as a release, not a theft, he said. She nodded once. Information is more valuable. When more than one person wants it, Margaret's voice came through, controlled but urgent. Ethan, if those contracts reach the wrong hands, I know, he said. Hospitals, data networks, infrastructure systems, not just money, control points, pressure points, weaknesses that could be exploited in ways far beyond finance. Benton spoke again. One of the endpoints just stabilized. Domestic server still active. Ethan's focus sharpened instantly. Location, West Side private data hub. We can reach it faster than the others. Keller didn't wait. We move. Ethan nodded. We move. Victoria watched him carefully. Now, you think stopping one endpoint changes anything? She asked. Ethan stepped closer to her, his voice low. It changes. Enough. She studied him for a second, then said quietly, you still don't understand what you're protecting. Ethan didn't answer because now wasn't the time to argue. Now was the time to act. Within minutes, they were moving again. The night air outside felt colder than before, sharper against Ethan's lungs as he stepped into the vehicle. His body reminded him he hadn't fully recovered, but his mind ignored it. Inside the SUV, Keller coordinated routes. Benton stayed on comms, tracking the active endpoints. Holding, Benton said. Whoever received that segment hasn't moved it yet. Why? Keller asked. Processing, maybe, Benton replied. Or verifying? Ethan spoke quietly. Or waiting. For what? Keller asked. For instructions, Ethan said. The vehicle turned sharply into a narrow street lined with industrial buildings, fewer lights, fewer people, the kind of place where things happened without witnesses. 2 minutes out, Keller said. Ethan's eyes stayed forward. Victoria's words echoed in his mind. You're chasing 5. He didn't need all 5. He needed one. One point of control, one place to push back. The SUV stopped. No hesitation this time. They moved. The building was smaller than expected. Reinforced doors, minimal signage. Keller signaled and the team moved into position. Entry point secured. One of the men said, go. Kel. The door was forced open. Inside, the air was warm, filled with the low hum of machines. Not as large as the previous server room, but active, purposeful. At the far end, a man stood at a terminal. He turned as they entered, eyes widening, not in fear, but in calculation. You're early, he said. Ethan stepped forward. You're still here. Cross gave a tight smile. Someone has to make sure things land properly. Where is it going? Ethan asked. Cross shrugged slightly. That depends on who pays attention first. Keller moved closer, step away from the terminal. Cross didn't resist. He stepped back slowly, raising his hands just enough to show he wasn't going to fight. Relax, he said. The hard part's already done. Ethan moved to the screen. Data stream still active, but slower, contained. Benton's voice came through. If we secure it, we cut off part of the distribution. Ethan nodded. Then we secure it. Access codes. Cross laughed lightly. You think I'm the kind of guy who keeps those on hand? Keller stepped forward, voice firm. You're the kind of guy who wants to stay out of prison. Cross's smile faded slightly. Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You were at my gate, he said. You delivered her message. Cross hesitated. Ethan stepped closer. That means you're closer to her than Vale was. That landed. Cross looked at him differently now, measuring. Then he exhaled. Temporary keys, rotating access. Give them to me, Ethan said. Cross shook his head. Even if I wanted to, they're already changing. Ethan looked at the screen again, then back at Cross. Then you're going to help us stop it. Cross smiled faintly. Why would I do that? Ethan didn't answer right away. Then he said quietly, because she's already done with you. Silence. Cross's expression shifted. Not fear, not yet, but doubt. Ethan saw it. She doesn't need you anymore. He continued. The transfer is done. The data is out. You're just the last person standing in a place we can find, Keller added. And we already found you. Cross's jaw tightened slightly. Ethan pressed further. You think she's going to circle back and protect you? Cross didn't respond because he knew the answer. Ethan leaned in just enough. Help us stop this and you have a chance to walk out of this differently. Cross looked at the screen, then at the door, then back at Ethan. You don't get it, he said quietly. This isn't about one payout. This is about positioning. Once this data spreads, people start making moves. Big ones. I know, Ethan said. Then you know you can't stop all of it. Ethan nodded. I don't have to, he said. Cross frowned. What does that mean? Ethan's voice dropped. I just have to stop enough. Keller stepped forward. Last chance. Cross closed his eyes for a second, then opened them. Fine, he said. He moved toward the terminal slowly, hands still visible. Temporary override, he said, typing quickly. It won't kill the data, but it'll lock this segment, delay the spread. Benton's voice came through. Tense. We're seeing it. This node is slowing. Ethan watched the screen. For the first time since this began, something stopped. Not everything, but something. Cross stepped back. That's all I can do, he said. Ethan nodded once. Keller secured him immediately. Ethan stood there watching the slow data stream. One segment contained 4 still out there, but now they weren't completely behind. Benton's voice came through again. Ethan, this changes things. If we can hit the others, we will, Ethan said. He turned away from the screen. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. But for the first time since Victoria pressed that key, he had taken something back. Control. Not all of it, but enough to fight. And somewhere, wherever she was, would feel it. Because the system she built was no longer moving unchecked. It was being hunted, piece by piece. The night did not end when the server slowed. It sharpened. Ethan Whitmore stood in the dim glow of the secondary data hub, watching the stabilized stream on the monitor. One segment contained 4 others still moving, still alive somewhere beyond his reach. But something fundamental had changed. For the first time since Victoria pressed that key, the system she built had resistance and she would feel it. Node is holding. Benton's voice confirmed through the comms. Cross wasn't exaggerating. This segment is locked in delay. Ethan didn't look away from the screen. How long? Hard to say, Benton replied. Minutes. Maybe longer if we reinforce it, then reinforce it. Keller nodded to the tech team. Do it. Behind them, Daniel Cross sat restrained, no longer speaking, no longer pretending control. His silence now was different from before. It wasn't calculation anymore. It was realization. Ethan turned to him briefly. You bought yourself time. Cross gave a faint, tired exhale. That's all anyone ever buys. Ethan didn't answer. He was already moving. Where's the next closest endpoint? He asked. Benton responded immediately. Offshore cluster too far. Another domestic north sector, but unstable. And one, he paused. One just went dark. Ethan stopped. What do you mean dark? No signal, Benton said, gone from the grid. Keller's voice lowered, pulled manually, or transferred again. Benton replied. Ethan's eyes narrowed, or she shut it down herself. Margaret's voice came through. Steady but sharp. Why would she do that? Ethan answered without hesitation. Because she doesn't need all 5 anymore. Silence followed. Benton spoke carefully. You think, Ethan said. She scattered the data to create pressure. Now, she gathers what matters. Keller stepped closer, which means she's heading somewhere specific. Ethan nodded slowly, not running position again. Not chaos, not panic, but something tighter. Focused. Trace the dark node, Ethan said, trying. Benton replied, residual signal only. Wait, a pause, we have a direction. Where? Back toward the city center, high-rise cluster. Ethan didn't hesitate. We move. Keller gave the order instantly. Pack up. We're relocating. As the team moved, Ethan took one last look at the slowed data stream. One piece secured, the rest still in play. But now he wasn't reacting to her plan. He was stepping into it. The city lights blurred past again as the convoy cut through traffic. Faster this time, less cautious. There was no need for subtlety anymore. Victoria had escalated, so had he. Inside the vehicle, Margaret's voice came through directly now. Ethan, listen to me. I am. This ends tonight. Ethan looked out the window. Yes, not just the data, she said, her APOA. Then Ethan answered quietly, I know. Benton's voice cut in. We've identified the building. Private executive tower upper floors leased through layered entities. Same network. Security? Keller asked. Minimal on paper, Benton said, which means nothing. Ethan leaned forward slightly. She chose it. Yes, Benton said, and she expects you to come. Ethan's expression didn't change. Good. The vehicles pulled into position. This time there was no hesitation. They entered elevator up higher than before. The silence inside was heavier now. Not uncertainty, but inevitability. The doors open, a wide corridor, glass walls, city stretching beyond like a sea of lights. At the far end, a single office, door open, lights on. No signal from Keller this time, no waiting. Inside, Victoria Lane stood by the window. No terminal, no servers, just her. She didn't turn immediately. You're faster than I expected, she said. Ethan stepped into the room. You're slower than you think. She smiled faintly and turned. You stopped one node, she said. That's impressive. It's enough. No, she replied softly. It's not. Keller and the team moved into position behind Ethan. Victoria didn't look at them, only him. You still believe this is about control? She said. Ethan didn't answer. Then let me finish it for you, she continued. It's about leverage, and now I have it. Ethan stepped closer. What did you keep? The party smile faded slightly. The part that matters, which is she held his gaze, silence stretched. Ethan's voice dropped. Who has it? Victoria shook her head slowly. Not who, where? Ethan didn't move. Then tell me. She studied him, searching for something. Weakness, hesitation, doubt. She didn't find it. You're not the same man who sat at that table. No, Ethan said. I'm not. A long pause. Then Victoria exhaled, almost tired. For what it's worth, she said. You weren't supposed to survive that night. Margaret's voice came sharply from behind. You'll answer for that. Victoria didn't look at her. I already have, she said. Keller stepped forward. It's over. Victoria didn't resist. Not this time, because she knew the movement was done. The plan had played out. The pieces were where they would fall. Ethan stood in front of her one last time. You lost, he said. Victoria looked at him, not defiant, not broken, just clear. No, she said quietly. Change what winning looks like. Ethan held her gaze, not anymore. Keller, move in. Victoria was taken into custody. No struggle, no final words, just silence. Ethan turned toward the window. The city stretched out below him, unchanged, unaware behind him. Benton's voice came through one last time. Ethan, the remaining nodes, we're tracking them. With what we have now, we can contain the rest. Ethan nodded slowly, then we finish it. Margaret stepped beside him. It's done, she said. Ethan looked out at the lights. No, he said. Then his voice lowered. But it will be because this wasn't just about stopping a plan anymore. It was about restoring what had been broken. Trust, control, truth. And somewhere in the estate, in a quiet guest room, far from all of this, a little girl who had been told to stay silent had changed everything by refusing to. Ethan turned from the window. Let's go home, he said. And for the first time since that night, it sounded like a place worth returning to. The story reminds us that truth often comes from the most unexpected voices. And ignoring it can come at a dangerous cost. It teaches that power and intelligence mean little without humility, the ability to listen, especially to those society tends to overlook. Annie's courage shows that integrity does not depend on age or status, while Ethan's journey reveals that real strength lies in admitting mistakes and choosing to correct them. In the end, the story warns that betrayal often hides behind trust, but justice can still prevail when people choose to stand firm, protect the innocent, and pursue the truth without compromise. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration